Hello everyone, and welcome back to another solo spooky story. My name's Rob, and today I'll be your host. For those of you who don't know, the solo spooky stories are short episodes every other week presented by myself, where I will just talk about something that I find pretty interesting, or Suze will find something that she wants to send on to me that we want to talk about, or something that a lovely listener has sent in to us. We do get them every once in a while, and we try to record them for the best appropriate kind of settings. So sometimes they're best suited to a conversation between myself and Suze, sometimes they're best suited to a short episode. So, we like to have a bit of variety here, and everyone seems to enjoy it. So they're kind of, we attract different sorts of people for the short episodes and the long episodes. And obviously the lovely listeners who listen to everything we put out, and we appreciate everyone. So I hope everyone's having a lovely time whenever you're listening to this, and we're just going to get into it. So it's been a while since we've talked about any sort of monster, I suppose, a classic sort of monster case that we've not talked about in a long time, at least on the short episodes. So, I thought it was appropriate and important to bring them back. It's been a while. We've been mostly UFOs and some kind of weirder cases. So, I thought it'd be good to go back to the roots of spooky. So last week, we talked about some other strange things, and this time we're going to keep this up. So today we're talking about a classic vampire case, which I think a lot of people have probably heard of this story. It's one of the more kind of, I suppose, historically believable vampire stories out there. And it also does come from the more eastern side of Europe. So it's got that just inherent more kind of creepy sort of Dracula vibe to it that you get from vampire stories. So we're going to get into this today. So we are, of course, talking about the famous vampire known as Petar Blagojevic. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. That's how I looked it up online. That's how I saw people pronouncing it. So if I got it wrong, I apologize. I obviously don't speak the language, but we'll just call him Petar going forward, or Peter. So just some kind of background, I suppose, before we get into the actual story itself. So as I said, we're talking about this vampire, and it's in modern day Serbia, but some background, I suppose, to the area that we're in. So we're in this kind of small Serbian village on the edge of the Habsburg Empire in the summer of 1725. The town is called Kisiljevo. I believe the modern village now is called Kisilova, or the other way around, apologies. It was called Kisilova, it's now called Kisiljevo. And it seems to be just one of these small villages with, multiple cottages, just the kind of, picturesque Eastern European village of the time. Lots of agriculture around is what I understand. And then it's kind of flanked by these densely forested areas where wolves apparently were quite a common sight in this area, and may still be, I'm not sure. But this is where our story takes place. So for centuries, this whole area had been, I suppose, teetering between the Ottoman and Habsburg rule, and it was kind of interchangeable at times. And around the Treaty of Pasorovic in 1718, it was firmly kind of under the Austrian banner, but Ottoman soldiers and then Serbian militia kind of were still in the fields around the area. And I think the best way I saw it described online was that loyalties ran complex in the area, and I think that's a fair summary of it. So into this kind of world and ever-changing space, Petar was born around 1662, and from what I can see generally online, he lived a pretty normal life. He was described as a peasant, which I still feel uncomfortable describing someone as that. Just a normal guy. He was just working class guy from what I understand. He was married to a woman called Anna, and he just worked his land. I believe he was kind of more agricultural based, so he worked on his land and looked after his family, really. And that would kind of be, I think, most of his life from the looks of things. Now, there was obviously a lot of tensions in the area, both kind of political and religious. There was some economic issues. I believe border villages were also causing some issues. So there was a lot going on in the greater picture of things. But from what I can see about Petar, he lived a pretty normal life, and I'm quite happy with that. So in the summer of 1725, Petar fell ill. So he was around 63 at this point, and he had these symptoms which are important, I suppose, to the case. So he had a fever, he had this horrible cough, and what was described by someone as a wasting weakness, which I believe nowadays people would say that was either tuberculosis or pneumonia, but I believe at the time it was called wasting weakness or something like that. So as I said, he was around 62, 63, and unfortunately he passed away from this illness. So the village priest in the area, conducted an Orthodox funeral rite, and Petar was laid to rest rest just outside the churchyard. This is kind of, I suppose, now where our story takes off. So no sooner had his body been buried, whispers began around the town. Allegedly, cattle refused to graze near his grave. Dogs would be heard howling at night, potentially wolves. I did say there's wolves in the area, but dogs howled at night. And a strange kind of chill allegedly seeped into nearby homes, despite it being in the middle of the summertime. Again, I'm sure people just talked about this afterwards, but we're going with the story. So this weirdness was kind of just going on, and I don't think people really thought too much of it. It was just strange, but that was it. Until 8 days after his burial, the first villager in the area fell very, very ill, and within 24 hours he was actually dead. He claimed on his deathbed while he was in the throes of sickness that Petar had visited him, and that not only has he visited him, but he'd actually buried his fingernails into the man's body and drank his blood from him. So this immediately obviously worried people greatly, and shortly after the first man died, a second, third and fourth victim all passed away at the same time, or in and around the same time, all claiming a vampire attack from Petar. Within a single week of the first person dying, 9 people made up of farming families, so children, adults, and even the village blacksmith, they'd all died, and each had pointed the finger towards the grave of Petar. They all basically said Petar had come out of the grave, had approached them on their deathbed, and basically attacked them in the night, drinking their blood, and basically gave them their sickness, effectively. So moving on from this then, I think people obviously started to get understandably very concerned. They didn't really know what to think of all of this, and I suppose the rational minded person would probably think, there has to be something else to this. But as we've seen with people throughout history, these things grow legs and they start to run very quickly, and that is exactly what happened. And it was actually Petar's wife Anna that I think was the straw that broke the camel's back here. So panic really kind of, I suppose, reached this crescendo or fever pitch in the town. It's a terrible choice of words. When Anna, Petar's wife herself, actually stepped forward with a story of just sheer terror for her. She swore that in the middle of the night, her late husband's silhouette basically came through the window, like real kind of Dracula style, or Nosferatu even. And she claimed that he had a sunken face, that his lips were stained dark, and that he tried to communicate with her. And when he started to talk to her, he demanded that she give him opanki, which are apparently these traditional leather shoes, so that he could go forth and walk the earth again, which is in itself a terrifying thing. Even if the dude isn't dead, he's broken into her room at night and demanding shoes off her. So, understandably stricken with terror, Anna fled the village, not before telling people what had happened, as she was convinced that her husband had basically come back from the grave. So the villagers, being terrified villagers at this point, banded together in the most Frankenstein-esque group of a squad. They were armed with torches, allegedly with pitchforks, and all the usual stereotypes of an angry mob at the time. And they decided the important thing to do would be to march to the cemetery. And yeah, they basically tried to confirm for themselves that something was up, that they knew that he was a vampire and they needed to confirm it. So they allegedly pried open his coffin and they found that his corpse lay completely preserved, that his skin was sallow, his hair and beard were trimmed but visibly grown, and they found that ultimately the terrifying thing was that there was fresh blood smeared at the corners of his mouth, and to the eyes of the villagers these were undeniable signs of vampirism, and it was proof that Petar had been rising nightly to basically feast on the village. So word of this immediately reached the office of Ernst Frombold. He was the Habsburg imperial provisor, and he was responsible for the administration of the region. And Frombold was a man who I've seen multiple accounts of him described online as a man of reason and bureaucratic order, and that he was unaccustomed to the superstitions of the region though. But the villagers effectively threatened to abandon their homes, leave the fields unattended, and let the livestock perish unless he did something about it. So he, from what I can see, generally seemed to reluctantly agree to oversee an exhumation and basically potential purging or killing of the vampire. So on the afternoon, in the days afterwards, Frombold basically allowed this to go ahead. So they assembled in the square. The local priest was also brought as well. From what I understand, it was against his wishes, but Frombold made sure to have him there. They dug up Petar's coffin again, and they again examined him, and they saw that his beard had continued to grow. Allegedly was a little bit more unkempt now. His nails had allegedly shown signs of growing even further, and there was again the blood around his nostrils this time and around his mouth. So with all of this in mind, Frombold agreed that something had to be done, and the villagers decided to drive a stake made out of hawthorn through Petar's heart. After this, they immediately took his body out and they burned it on a pyre and decided to scatter his ashes in the river to basically ensure that he could never return. And yeah, it was effectively viewed as this kind of practice where they would anchor the undead and then free the village from its curse. So I suppose remarkably or sadly, whatever way you want to look at it, the very next week brought no new deaths. Livestock apparently returned to graze. Dogs no longer were whimpering at night, and people allegedly said that the knights lost their dread. So in the villagers' minds, basically peace had been restored, and for the officials in the area, it was a perplexing, I suppose, resolution to a crisis that was kind of threatening to unfold. So I suppose the interesting thing about this being under the Habsburg Empire is that they actually had meticulous administration at this period. So they filled a report naturally. So Frombold actually filled out a precise report that he sent to Vienna, and it actually became the first detailed case of vampirism in the Habsburg archives. It kind of included medical descriptions, witness testimonies, the ritual steps that were all kind of recorded and happening. And it was all written in this like bureaucratic language, which is really interesting. It's just very factual. And due to this report being made, within months, rumors had reached Paris and London, igniting this curiosity and the whole thing. And basically scholars have agreed that this was the first in what they've called vampire lore, as this kind of genuine case that kind of set it all off. So after this, naturally, other regions in the area started to panic, saying that they also had vampires. So in nearby Slavonia and Moravia, villagers began exhuming bodies, searching for signs of the undead. Local magistrates kind of grappled with this, like trying to enforce law and order, but also to respect the traditions. Apparently, priests came in and started doing exorcisms and stake drivings. And basically, from what I can understand in the region, it was kind of viewed that there was almost like a vampire plague that became this nightmare, this recurring nightmare in the mid 18th century. And it lasted for quite a while. So yeah, that kind of concludes the story. So the reason, or the region now and the village, they've actually started to embrace this kind of legacy. Archaeologists and local historians now talk about how Petar's like headstone there has been engraved with Orthodox crosses and Slavic motifs. Apparently the cemetery that he's buried in has become this kind of tourist location, and there's even a vampire festival held in the town. There's candlelit tours, and you see kind of people in like period costumes reenacting the staking and all that. So, you know, it's kind of, the town itself are not exactly shying away from it. But yeah, that kind of concludes it. There's been some obviously modern explanations for what it could have been, everything from infectious diseases like tuberculosis or typhus, even potentially ergot poisoning. And yeah, it's a sad case in the sense that people felt the need to desecrate a body to make themselves feel better. But I suppose with everything that it's sparked afterwards, it's just kind of fascinating glimpse into the past that we don't really get anymore, obviously, in the modern world. But yeah, as I said, I really, really enjoyed this case. I've heard of it before, and you know, I thought it would be cool to just dive back into a classic scary story. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear what you think. A really cool, interesting case. You can reach us on social media and on Threads and Instagram at the Spooky AF Pod. We're also on YouTube, and you can get us a Gmail at the spookyafpodcast@gmail.com. As I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. And yeah, apart from that, I hope you're having a lovely day whenever it is that you listen to this, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.